Captain Dong-Soo Kim stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel Persistence, watching the stars through the main screen. The ship was huge, almost 2 kilometers long, with gleaming white hull plating that reflected the distant light of Vega. 200 people called this vessel home, all of them dedicated to pushing the boundaries of human knowledge deeper into space. "Captain, we're getting some strange readings from the sensor array," called out Science Officer So-Young Choi from her station. She was young for her position, barely 30, but her skills with quantum physics had earned her the post. Her dark, wurton hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes showed the kind of focus that came from years of study. Dong-Soo walked over to look at her screen. The numbers dancing across the display made no sense to him, but he trusted So-Young completely. "What kind of strange?" "Gravitational anomalies, sir. There's something out there that's pulling space in directions that shouldn't be possible." She touched a few controls and the main screen changed to show a star chart. A red dot pulsed in empty space, surrounded by swirling patterns that hurt to look at. "It's about 3 light hours away from our current position." "Could it be a black hole?" asked Navigation Officer Tae-Ho Lee. He was older than So-Young, with gray starting to show in his hair, and had been exploring space for 20 years. His voice carried the calm confidence of someone who had seen everything the galaxy could throw at him. "No, sir," So-Young replied. "Black holes bend space in predictable ways. This is different. It's like something is tearing holes in the fabric of reality itself." Chief Engineer Hyojin Park looked up from the engineering console where she had been monitoring the ship's systems. She was a small woman, but tough as steel, with hands that could fix anything mechanical, and a mind that understood the Persistence's engines better than anyone else alive. "Captain, I don't like the sound of this. Our engines are already running at 90% capacity just to maintain our current course. If we get too close to whatever that thing is, we might not be able to break free." Dong-Soo nodded thoughtfully. He had been captain of the Persistence for 5 years, and in that time he had learned to trust his crew completely. But he also knew that humanity's greatest discoveries had always come from investigating the unknown, even when it seemed dangerous. "Set course for the anomaly," he ordered. "But keep us at a safe distance. I want to know what we're dealing with before we get too close." The ship changed course smoothly, its advanced engines humming with quiet power. The Persistence was the most advanced vessel in the Terran Colonial Authority's fleet, equipped with the latest in drive technology, defensive systems, and scientific instruments. If anyone could safely investigate this mystery, it was them. As they approached the anomaly, the readings became more and more impossible. So-Young called out numbers that violated the basic laws of physics. Space itself seemed to be folding in on itself, creating pockets where time moved backward and gravity pointed in 17 different directions at once. "Captain?" Tae-Ho said, his voice tight with concern. "I'm having trouble maintaining our position. The navigation computer keeps giving me error messages. It's like space doesn't know which way is up anymore." Through the main screen they could see it now. It wasn't a black hole or a star or anything that should exist in normal space. It looked like a crack in reality itself, a jagged tear that showed glimpses of something beyond. Colors that had no names flickered through the gap, and occasionally they could see shapes that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. "My God," whispered So-Young. "It's a dimensional rift. Somehow something has torn a hole between our universe and somewhere else." The ship shuddered as gravitational waves washed over them. Hyojin's voice came over the communication system from the engine room. "Captain, the engines are struggling. Whatever that thing is, it's pulling us in. I can give you full power for maybe 10 minutes before we start losing structural integrity." Dong-Soo made his decision. "All hands, prepare for emergency jump. We're getting out of here while we still can." But even as he gave the order, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. The rift was expanding, growing larger and more unstable by the second. Tendrils of impossible energy reached out toward the Persistence, wrapping around the hull like grasping fingers. "Captain, the jump drive won't engage," Tae-Ho reported. "Something is interfering with our navigation systems. We're trapped." The main screen flickered and showed images that couldn't be real. Cities floating in clouds of light. Beings made of pure energy dancing through dimensions that existed only in mathematics. stars being born and dying in the space of heartbeats, and through it all, a sense of vast intelligence watching them with curiosity rather than hostility. Engine. Power at critical levels. Hee-jin's voice came through, strained with effort. Captain, we have maybe 2 minutes before complete system failure. Dong-su looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were scared, but they trusted him. He had brought them safely through asteroid fields and solar storms, past hostile alien territories, and into the depths of space where no human had ever gone before. They believed he would find a way out of this too. So young, is there any way to predict where that rift leads? No, sir. The readings are completely outside anything in our databases. It could lead to another part of our galaxy, or another universe entirely, or somewhere that doesn't follow the same laws of physics we do. The ship shuddered again, more violently this time. Through the hull they could hear the groaning of metal under impossible stress. The rift was pulling them in, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Captain, Hee-jin's voice was barely audible over the noise of straining engines. If we're going to do something, it has to be now. In 30 seconds we won't have any power left at all. Dong-su closed his eyes for a moment, thinking of his wife back on Earth, of the 200 people on his ship who were counting on him to keep them safe. Then he opened them and looked directly at the rift that was swallowing his ship. All hands, brace for impact. We're going in. He turned to Taeho. Cut engines and let it take us. If we're going through that thing, we go with whatever power we have left. Sir, we don't know what's on the other side. So Young protested. No, we don't, Dong-su agreed. But we're explorers. This is what we signed up for. The Persistence was pulled inexorably toward the rift. As they crossed the threshold, reality seemed to bend around them. The stars disappeared, replaced by swirling patterns of light that existed in colors the human eye had never seen before. Time moved strangely, stretching some moments into hours while compressing others into nothing. The last thing Dong-su saw on his instruments was the rift closing behind them, sealing them off from the universe they had known. The last thing he heard was his own voice, transmitted automatically to the emergency beacon, saying words that would puzzle investigators for a century to come. We're seeing something impossible. The ship is intact, but we're not in normal space anymore. If anyone receives this message, tell Earth that the Persistence has found something beyond human understanding. We're going to learn everything we can, and somehow, we're going to find our way home. Then the transmission cut out, and the ship vanished into dimensions that had no names, carrying 200 human souls into a realm where the laws of physics were merely suggestions, and consciousness itself could reshape reality. 100 years had passed since the Persistence vanished, and the galaxy was a very different place. The memorial services were long forgotten. The families who had mourned were dust. Earth itself barely remembered the ship that had disappeared. While exploring the edges of known space, Admiral Woo Jin-yoon stood on the bridge of the Keth command ship Dominance, looking out at the fleet of alien vessels that surrounded Earth's orbital stations. The ships were beautiful in their own way, constructed from some kind of crystalline material that seemed to grow rather than being built. They moved through space like living things, their hulls pulsing with inner light. But Woo Jin felt no admiration for them. These ships represented the end of human independence, the final defeat of everything his species had worked to achieve among the stars. The Keth had arrived 50 years ago, sweeping through human space like a storm. Their technology was so far beyond anything humans possessed that resistance had been pointless. Their weapons could tear apart matter at the molecular level, reducing entire space stations to their component atoms in seconds. Their shields could turn aside any attack humanity could mount, from nuclear missiles to directed energy beams. The war, if it could even be called that, had lasted 3 weeks. Now humans served their alien masters, providing raw materials and basic labor throughout what had once been the Terran colonial authority. Earth's colonies were strip-mined for rare metals. Human workers toiled in orbital factories, producing goods they would never be allowed to use. The proud ships of the Terran fleet had been scrapped or converted into cargo haulers. Woo Jin was one of the lucky ones, if it could be called luck. His knowledge of human space and his willingness to cooperate had earned him a position as a liaison officer aboard Keth vessels. He told himself it was better to work with the invaders than to resist and be destroyed. But every day he wondered if he was just a coward who had chosen survival over honor. The Keth themselves were tall, elegant beings with skin that shifted, color like oil on water. They had 4 arms and large eyes that could see across more of the electromagnetic spectrum than human vision allowed. They were not cruel exactly, but they viewed humans the way humans might view particularly useful insects. Valuable for certain tasks, but not worthy of respect or consideration. Human Wu Jin, came the musical voice of Overlord Vex 9, the Keth commander of the Dominance. The alien's words were translated by implants that all human servants were required to have surgically installed. Report to the navigation center. There is a matter that requires your expertise. Wu Jin walked through the corridors of the alien ship, past walls that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat and floors that felt warm beneath his feet. Everything about Keth architecture was organic, grown rather than built, and it made humans feel like parasites living inside some vast creature. The navigation center was a spherical room with displays floating in mid-air, showing star charts and sensor readings that covered thousands of light years. 3 Keth officers worked at stations that responded to thought as much as touch, their 4 arms moving in complex patterns as they manipulated the controls. There is an anomalous reading, Vex 9 explained, pointing to one of the displays, with a limb that ended in delicate, almost flower-like fingers. Something large has appeared in the outer system of the human world you call New Horizon. It does not match any known vessel type in our databases. Wu Jin looked at the readings, his enhanced implants translating the Keth symbols into human numerals he could understand. Whatever had appeared was massive, larger than any ship in the Keth fleet. Its energy signature was unlike anything he had ever seen, showing power levels that should have been impossible to contain in a single vessel. Could it be a derelict? He asked. Maybe something left over from before your arrival? Unlikely, replied Navigator Keth 7, her skin shifting to a deep blue color that indicated concentration. The energy patterns are active, not passive. This vessel is fully functional and appears to be broadcasting some kind of signal. What kind of signal? That is what puzzles us. It appears to be in human languages, but the technology used to generate it is far beyond anything your species has ever demonstrated. The carrier wave exists in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Wu Jin felt a cold chill run down his spine. 17 dimensions? That's impossible. Human technology can barely handle the 4 basic dimensions of space-time. Vex 9's skin took on the golden hue that meant amusement. Indeed, yet the evidence is before us. The signal identifies the vessel as the exploration ship Persistence, missing for 100 of your years. It requests permission to approach Earth. The name hit Wu Jin like a physical blow. Every human child learned about the great exploration ships that had vanished during the early days of deep space travel. The Persistence was one of the most famous, having disappeared while investigating gravitational anomalies near the Vega system. Its loss had been mourned across human space, and conspiracy theorists had spent decades speculating about what might have happened to it. That's impossible, he whispered. The Persistence was destroyed a century ago. There were no survivors. Yet here it is, Vex 9 replied, very much intact and broadcasting on frequencies that should not exist. Most curious, the Keth had built their empire on superior technology and absolute confidence in their understanding of the universe. They had conquered dozens of species across the galaxy, always finding that their crystalline ships and dimensional weapons were more than sufficient to overcome any resistance. But now they were faced with something that challenged their understanding of what was possible. I want you to accompany our investigation fleet, Vex 9 continued. Your knowledge of human culture and history may prove useful in determining what we are dealing with. If this vessel truly is what it claims to be, we must understand how it acquired technology that appears to exceed even our own capabilities. Wu Jin nodded, though his mind was racing. The Persistence had been one of the most advanced ships of its time, but it had still used fusion rockets and primitive hyperspace drives. Even if it had somehow survived for a century, there was no way it could have developed technology that impressed the Keth, unless it had found something out there in the darkness between the stars. something that had changed it in ways that human science couldn't begin to understand. The investigation fleet launched within hours, 12 Keth warships accompanied by support vessels and science platforms. As they traveled toward New Horizon, Wu Jin found himself thinking about the old stories of human exploration, about brave crews who had ventured into the unknown seeking knowledge and discovery. Those days seemed like ancient history now. Humans no longer explored the galaxy. They served alien masters who decided where they could go and what they could see. The spirit that had once driven humanity to reach for the stars had been crushed under the weight of conquest and submission. But somewhere out there, the persistence was waiting. A ghost from humanity's proud past returned at the moment when hope seemed most lost. Wu Jin didn't know what to expect when they found it, but for the first time in decades, he felt something that had been missing from his life. He felt the stirring of possibility, the faint hope that maybe humanity's story wasn't over after all. The fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the New Horizon system, and immediately every alarm on every ship began sounding at once. There, hanging in space like an impossibility made manifest, was the Persistence. But it was not the ship that had vanished a century ago. It had been transformed into something beyond human understanding, something that made even the advanced Keth technology seem primitive by comparison. And as they watched, it began to move toward them with a grace and power that defied every law of physics they thought they knew. The Persistence defied every law of physics that Wu Jin had ever learned. The ship he was looking at bore almost no resemblance to the exploration vessel that had vanished a century ago. Where the original had been built from steel and titanium alloys, this version seemed to be constructed from materials that bent light around themselves, creating a hull that shimmered and shifted like liquid mercury. The ship was still recognizably human in design, but it had been enhanced in ways that hurt to look at directly. Energy patterns flowed across its surface in colors that existed beyond the normal spectrum of light. Parts of the hull seemed to fade in and out of normal space, as if the vessel existed in multiple dimensions at the same time. "By the void," whispered Navigator Keth 7, her skin cycling rapidly through colors that indicated fear and confusion. "The energy readings are impossible. That vessel is generating more power than our entire fleet combined, but there are no visible engines or power sources." Overlord Vex 9 stood perfectly still on the bridge of the Dominance, but Wu Jin could see the subtle signs of tension in the alien's posture. In 50 years of conquest, the Keth had never encountered anything that challenged their technological supremacy. Their crystalline ships were the most advanced vessels in known space. Their dimensional weapons could tear apart matter at the quantum level, and their shields could deflect any form of energy that other species could produce. But the Persistence was scanning them with sensors that registered on instruments the Keth didn't even know existed. "Incoming transmission," reported Communications Officer Dex 3. "It's using carrier waves that exist in 17 different dimensions simultaneously. Our translation systems are having difficulty processing the signal." "Put it through," Vex 9 ordered. The main display flickered and resolved into the image of a human face. Wu Jin recognized him immediately from the historical records, Captain Dong-Soo Kim, the commander of the original Persistence. But something was different about him. His skin had strange markings that seemed to pulse with inner light, and his eyes held depths that hadn't been there in the old photographs. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that bypassed the translation, implants entirely, speaking directly to the mind of anyone who heard it. "This is Captain Dong-Soo Kim of the exploration vessel Persistence. We are requesting permission to approach Earth. We have much to discuss." Vex 9 stepped forward, his skin shifting to the deep red that indicated authority and command. "I am Overlord Vex 9 of the Keth hegemony. Earth is under our protection and control. State your intentions and submit to inspection, or you will be destroyed." The human captain smiled, and there was something in that expression that made Wu Jin's blood run cold. It wasn't mockery or defiance, it was pity. "Overlord Vex 9, Dong-Soo replied. "We mean no harm to you or your people, but Earth is our home, and we have returned to share what we have learned during our century of exploration We would welcome the opportunity to speak with you face to face. Your technology is impressive, Vex-9 admitted, but do not mistake our caution for weakness. The Keth Empire spans thousands of star systems. Our weapons can unmake matter at the molecular level. Surrender now, and you will be treated with the respect due to a valuable curiosity. We understand your position, Dongsu said gently, but you misunderstand ours. We are not here to fight or to conquer. We are here to help humanity take its next step in evolution. You are welcome to witness this, if you choose. Without waiting for a response, the transmission ended. Arrogant creature, Vex-9 muttered, his skin cycling through the dark purples that indicated anger. Ready all weapons. We will demonstrate the futility of resistance. Sir, interrupted Science Officer Yex-2, the readings from that vessel are unlike anything in our databases. Perhaps we should exercise caution until we understand what we're dealing with. But Vex-9 was already giving orders. The 12 Keth warships spread into attack formation, their crystalline hulls beginning to glow as energy built up in their dimensional weapons. Each ship carried enough firepower to level a continent, and together they could reduce a planet to asteroid rubble. The weapons fired in perfect synchronization, streams of energy that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, designed to tear apart the quantum bonds that held matter together. It was the same attack that had ended the human resistance 50 years ago, and it had never failed against any target. The energy beams struck the Persistence and passed through it completely, as if the ship wasn't entirely there. Impossible, breathed Keth-7. Our weapons have no effect. It's as if the target exists partially outside normal space-time. The Persistence began to move, not with the slow acceleration of conventional spacecraft, but with the fluid grace of something that had transcended the normal limitations of physics. It approached the Keth fleet at speeds that should have been impossible, covering the distance between them in seconds rather than hours. As it drew closer, Wu Jin could see details that made his mind struggle to process what he was looking at. The ship's hull was covered in patterns that seemed to shift and change as he watched. Mathematical equations written in light that described relationships between dimensions he couldn't even name. Parts of the vessel flickered in and out of visibility, as if it was only choosing to exist in normal space when it needed to. Communication from the human vessel, Dex-3 reported, his voice tight with fear. They are requesting permission to come aboard. Denied, Vex-9 snapped. Increase power to maximum. Focus all fire on their command section. The Keth ships unleashed everything they had, weapons that could crack moons and shields that could withstand the explosion of suns. The space around the Persistence filled with energy so intense that it warped light itself into spirals and knots. When the barrage ended, the human ship was completely unharmed. Perhaps, came Captain Dongsu's voice over the communication system, we could discuss this more civilly. We really do mean you no harm. A section of the Persistence's hull simply wasn't there anymore, revealing a docking bay that glowed with soft, welcoming light. It wasn't that a door had opened. It was as if the ship had decided that particular piece of its hull didn't need to exist at that moment. This is beyond our current understanding, Yex-2 said quietly. Sir, I recommend we accept their invitation. Our weapons are clearly ineffective, but they have made no aggressive moves against us. Vex-9 was silent for a long moment, his skin cycling through colors that indicated deep thought and careful calculation. The Keth had built their empire on the certainty that their technology was superior to anything they might encounter. But now they faced something that made their most advanced weapons look like primitive clubs. Very well, he said finally. Prepare a boarding party, but maintain full alert status on all ships. If this is some kind of trap, I want to be ready to retreat immediately. Wu Jin found himself included in the boarding party, along with 5 Keth officers and their personal guards. As their shuttle approached the Persistence, he could see that the docking bay was impossible in more ways than one. It was clearly larger inside than the external dimensions of the ship would allow, and the wall seemed to curve in directions that didn't exist in normal 3-dimensional space. When they landed and stepped out of their shuttle, they were greeted by Captain Dongsu himself. He looked exactly as he had in the transmission, with those strange markings on his skin that pulsed with gentle light. But up close, Wu Jin could see that there was something fundamentally different about him, something that went beyond the physical changes. He seemed more real than everything around him, as if he existed with a solidity and presence that made the rest of the universe look like shadows by comparison. "Welcome aboard the Persistence," Dongsu said, and his voice carried harmonics that resonated in dimensions Wu Jin didn't know existed. "We have much to show you, and much to learn from each other. The universe is far stranger and more wonderful than any of us originally believed." As they were led deeper into the ship, Wu Jin realized that humanity's long defeat might be coming to an end in ways that no one could have imagined. Walking through the corridors of the transformed Persistence was like moving through a living dream. The walls pulsed with soft bioluminescence, and the floor felt warm and yielding beneath their feet, as if the ship itself was alive and responding to their presence. Equations and symbols flowed across the surfaces in languages that seemed to bypass the need for translation, speaking directly to the mind with meanings that transcended words. Captain Dongsu led them through passages that folded space in impossible ways. They walked for what seemed like minutes but covered distances that should have taken hours. The ship was far larger inside than its external dimensions could possibly contain, with rooms and corridors that existed in geometries that made Wu Jin's head ache when he tried to understand them. "How is this possible?" Overlord Vex 9 asked, his skin cycling through colors that indicated deep confusion and growing concern. "No known technology can manipulate space-time to this degree." "Known technology," Dongsu replied with that same gentle smile. "You're quite right about that. What we learned during our century of exploration goes far beyond anything that was previously known to either of our species." They entered what had once been the ship's main engineering section, but it no longer bore any resemblance to the mechanical heart of a conventional spacecraft. Instead, they found themselves in a vast chamber that seemed to extend infinitely in all directions. Streams of light flowed through the air like rivers of liquid energy, converging on a central structure that hurt to look at directly. Chief Engineer Hai-Jin Park stood near the central structure, her hands moving in complex patterns as she manipulated forces that existed beyond the normal electromagnetic spectrum. Like Captain Dongsu, she bore the strange markings that pulsed with inner light, and her eyes held depths that spoke of understanding beyond human comprehension. "The principle is actually quite simple," she explained, her voice carrying the same multidimensional harmonics as her captain's. "Matter and energy are just different expressions of consciousness. Once you understand that fundamental truth, manipulating them becomes a matter of focused intention rather than mechanical engineering." She gestured toward one of the energy streams, and it responded to her will, coiling through the air like a serpent made of pure light. With another gesture, she caused it to solidify into a perfect crystal that chimed with musical tones when it touched the deck. "Impossible," whispered Science Officer Yex 2. "Consciousness cannot directly affect matter. There must be some intermediate technology that we're not seeing." He-Jin shook her head. "No intermediate technology, just understanding. Your species has advanced far in manipulating the physical universe through mechanical means, but you've never learned to work with the deeper layers of reality where thought and matter intersect." She led them to an observation deck, where Science Officer So Young Choi was conducting what could only be called experiments, though they bore no resemblance to any scientific methodology that Wu Jin had ever seen. She was manipulating matter at the quantum level with nothing more than focused concentration, creating new elements that shouldn't have been able to exist under normal physical laws. "The beings we encountered taught us that reality has 17 basic dimensions," So Young explained, her voice carrying the patient tone of a teacher addressing particularly slow students. "Your technology and ours both operate primarily in the first 4 dimensions, but once you learn to access the others, the possibilities become limitless." She held up her hand, and in her palm, a miniature star began to form, not a mechanical reproduction or a holographic simulation, but an actual fusion reaction contained in a space no larger than a marble. The tiny star pulsed with real heat and light, casting dancing shadows on the walls around them. "This star will burn for approximately 10,000 years, she said casually. I could make it larger or smaller, hotter or cooler, or cause it to exist in 17 dimensions simultaneously, so that it would be completely undetectable to conventional sensors. Vex-9's skin had gone completely white, a color that indicated either complete terror or absolute fascination. Who were these beings that taught you such things? Where did you encounter them? Captain Dongsu gestured for them to follow him to another section of the ship. They walked through corridors where the walls showed glimpses of other realities, parallel universes where different physical laws applied and where consciousness had evolved along paths that no human or Keth mind could fully comprehend. We found ourselves in a region of space where the normal laws of physics were merely suggestions, Dongsu explained. There, we encountered entities so advanced that they exist as pure information, beings that have transcended the need for physical form entirely. They treated our arrival as a curiosity at first, then as an opportunity. They entered what had once been the ship's navigation center, where Navigation Officer Tae-Ho Lee was working with star charts that showed not just the positions of suns and planets, but their relationships across multiple dimensions and timelines. The maps he studied included routes through parallel universes and pathways between dimensions that existed only in the spaces between thoughts. The beings offered us a choice, Tae-Ho said without looking up from his work. We could join them, transcending our physical forms to become beings of pure consciousness, or we could return to our home dimension and help our species begin the journey toward that same transcendence. Obviously, we chose to return, Dongsu added. But we brought knowledge with us. Knowledge of how consciousness and matter interact, at the most fundamental levels. Knowledge of dimensions beyond the physical. Knowledge of humanity's true potential. And what is that potential? Wu Jin asked, speaking for the first time since boarding the ship. So Young smiled at him, and in that expression he saw something that made his heart race with possibilities he had never dared to imagine. To become partners with the universe itself. To shape reality through understanding rather than force. To take our place among the truly advanced species that guide the development of consciousness throughout the galaxy. You speak of consciousness as if it were a fundamental force. Of nature, Vex-9 observed. Because it is, He-Jin replied. Consciousness is the force that collapses quantum possibilities into specific realities. It's the underlying structure that gives meaning to matter and energy. Your technology is advanced, but it's still based on the assumption that mind and matter are separate phenomena. Once you understand that they're different aspects of the same underlying reality, everything changes. She gestured toward the central structure in the engineering section, and suddenly, Wu Jin could see it clearly. It wasn't a machine at all, but a crystallized thought, a physical manifestation of pure understanding that served as the ship's consciousness and will. The persistence doesn't have engines in the conventional sense, Dongsu explained. The ship moves because it understands that distance is a flexible concept. It's unharmed by weapons because it chooses to exist primarily in dimensions where those weapons cannot reach. It can be larger inside than outside because space itself responds to conscious intention. This is beyond our understanding, Vex-9 said quietly. How do you propose to share such knowledge with the rest of humanity? Most humans lack even basic understanding of advanced physics. The same way the beings shared it with us, So Young replied. Not through teaching, but through awakening. The potential exists in every conscious mind. It simply needs to be activated, and that's what we intend to do, Dongsu said, his voice carrying a note of determination that hadn't been there before. Starting with Earth, our homeworld has suffered under the weight of conquest for too long. It's time for humanity to remember what it truly is, and to take its rightful place among the stars. Wu Jin felt something stirring within him, a sense of possibility that he had thought was lost forever. For 50 years, he had lived with the shame of humanity's defeat, accepting that his species would forever serve alien masters. But now, looking at his transformed countrymen and the impossible ship they commanded, he began to understand that defeat had never been permanent. It had only been the first step in humanity's real journey. What do you need from us? He asked. Dongsu's smile widened, and in that moment, Wu Jin saw the future opening up like a flower blooming in fast forward, showing him glimpses of what humanity might become. The persistence arrived in Earth's solar system like a whisper that gradually became a song. As it approached humanity's home world, its presence seemed to awaken something that had been sleeping in the collective consciousness of the species. Across the planet's surface and in the orbital stations where billions of humans toiled under Keith oversight, people began to feel a strange stirring in their minds. Wu Jin stood on the observation deck of the transformed ship, looking down at the world of his birth. What he saw made his heart break with rage and sorrow. Earth's once blue oceans were stained brown with industrial runoff. The continents were scarred with strip mines that stretched from horizon to horizon. The orbital factories that ringed, the planet glowed with the constant fire of production, churning out goods that humans would never be allowed to own. "This is what 50 years of Keth rule has done to your world," Overlord Vex 9 said, his skin showing the pale green of what might have been shame. "We required resources to fuel our expansion across the galaxy. Earth was efficient in providing them." "Efficient," Dongsu repeated quietly, and there was something in his tone that made the very air around them seem to vibrate with suppressed power. "Yes, I suppose enslaving an entire species and strip mining their homeworld would be quite efficient." Captain Dongsu had changed during the journey from the outer system. The markings on his skin pulsed brighter now, and when he moved, space itself seemed to bend slightly around him, as if reality was having trouble containing his presence. The same transformation was visible in his crew. They were still recognizably human, but they had become something more than human, something that existed partially in dimensions beyond the physical. "The question now," So Young said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in the bones of everyone who heard it, "is whether you will help us repair the damage, or whether you will resist and force us to work around you." The Keth boarding party had been aboard the Persistence for 3 days now, and Wu Jin had watched their growing confusion and fear as they gradually understood the magnitude of what they were facing. The ship's crew demonstrated capabilities that violated everything the Keth thought they knew about the universe. They manipulated matter with thought, traveled through dimensions that shouldn't exist, and spoke of consciousness as if it were a force as fundamental as gravity or electromagnetism. "What exactly are you proposing to do?" Vex 9 asked. "We're going to teach our people to remember what they truly are," Hai Jin replied from her position near the ship's central consciousness matrix. "Human beings are not meant to be slaves or servants. We are explorers, dreamers, creators. We have the potential to reshape reality itself, but first we need to awaken that potential." She gestured toward the main display, which showed Earth in perfect detail despite being several light minutes away. The image zoomed in to show individual cities, then individual buildings, then individual people going about their daily lives, of labor and servitude. "Watch," she said softly. The display focused on a human worker in one of the orbital factories, a man whose back was bent with exhaustion as he operated machinery that sorted raw materials for Keth use. Suddenly, the man straightened, his eyes widening as if he had just remembered something important. He looked around the factory floor with new understanding, seeing not just the endless repetition of his tasks but the fundamental nature of the matter he was working with. He reached out and touched a piece of metal, and under his fingers it began to flow like water, reshaping itself into forms that were both beautiful and functional. Other workers stopped their tasks to stare, and as they watched they too began to remember things they had never been taught. "Impossible," Yex2 whispered. "You cannot simply awaken psychic abilities in ordinary humans. Such talents require centuries of evolution or genetic modification." "You still don't understand," Teho said gently. "These aren't psychic abilities. This is simply consciousness learning to interact directly with matter instead of requiring mechanical intermediaries. Every thinking being has this potential. It just needs to be activated." The scene repeated across Earth's surface and in the orbital stations. Humans who had spent their lives in servitude began to remember their true nature. They looked at the materials they worked with and understood them not just as objects but as patterns of energy that could be reshaped through focused intention. They looked at the machines they operated and saw ways to improve them that their Keth overseers had never imagined. Within hours, production in the factories had increased threefold, not through harder work, but through deeper understanding. Workers began creating things that had never existed before, devices that combined human creativity with principles of physics that went beyond what either species had previously discovered. The Keth overseers panicked. They had built their control of humanity on the assumption that their slaves were incapable of advanced thinking or technological innovation. But now they watched human workers casually manipulating matter at the quantum level, creating energy sources that violated the conservation laws, and building devices that operated in dimensions the Keth couldn't even perceive. This must be stopped, Vex 9 declared, his skin cycling through the deep reds of alarm and authority. Contact the fleet. Order them to begin bombardment of the population centers. We cannot allow this awakening to spread. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Dongsu replied calmly. The main display shifted to show the Keth fleet in orbit around Earth. The crystalline ships were moving into bombardment formation, their dimensional weapons charging to full power. But as they prepared to fire, something impossible happened. The weapons simply stopped working. What? Vex 9 stared at the display in shock. How is this possible? The weapons depend on manipulating quantum fields to tear apart molecular bonds, So Young explained patiently. But the quantum fields around Earth are now under conscious control. The awakening humans can prevent your weapons from accessing the dimensional spaces they require to function. On the surface of Earth, millions of newly awakened humans were working together without conscious coordination. They reached out with minds that had suddenly learned to perceive and manipulate the fundamental structures of reality, and they simply denied the Keth weapons permission to operate in local space. This is rebellion, Vex 9 said, his voice tight with fear and anger. The Empire will not tolerate this. We will bring reinforcements from across the galaxy. We will crush this uprising before it can spread. Will you? Dongsu asked, and for the first time there was something dangerous in his voice. Let me show you what your options really are. The display shifted again, showing the Keth command ship dominance in perfect detail. As they watched, the ship began to change. Not destroyed, not damaged, but transformed. Its crystalline hull began to flow like liquid, reshaping itself into new configurations that were both beautiful and completely functional. What are you doing to my ship? Vex 9 demanded. Improving it, Hyegen replied. Your crystalline construction methods are quite elegant, but they're limited by your understanding of how consciousness and matter interact. We're simply showing you what's possible when those limitations are removed. The dominance was now something that had never existed before, a fusion of Keth engineering and human consciousness that operated on principles both species were only beginning to understand. Its weapons were gone, replaced with devices that could manipulate matter and energy in ways that made destruction obsolete. Why destroy something when you could simply transform it into something better? You see, Dongsu continued, we're not here to conquer or to resist. We're here to offer partnership. The universe is vast and there's room for all conscious beings to explore its mysteries together. But the age of one species dominating another is over. Consciousness is awakening across the galaxy, and trying to suppress it would be like trying to hold back the tide. Across human space, the awakening continued. On colony worlds and space stations, in asteroid mines and research facilities, human beings who had lived their entire lives as servants and laborers began to remember what they truly were. They looked at their circumstances with new eyes and began to change them through sheer force of understanding. The transformation was not violent. There were no wars, no revolutions in the traditional sense. Instead, there was simply a fundamental shift in the relationship between consciousness and reality. Humans who had been slaves became partners in their own liberation, working with matter and energy as collaborators rather than dominators. Some Keth resisted, trying to maintain their dominance through force and authority, but their weapons no longer functioned. Their technology seemed primitive compared to what awakened consciousness could achieve. and their certainty about the nature of reality crumbled in the face of phenomena they couldn't explain or control. Other Keth, the wiser ones, began to ask questions. They watched the transformation of human society with growing wonder and realized that they were witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. Perhaps, they thought, it was time to learn rather than rule. Standing on the observation deck of the Persistence, Wu Jin watched his species take its first steps toward a destiny that no one could have imagined. The shame and defeat of the past 50 years was dissolving. 6 months after the awakening began, the galaxy was no longer recognizable as the same universe where the Keth Empire had once ruled supreme. What had started with a handful of awakened humans on Earth had spread like ripples across the fabric of space-time itself, touching every world where consciousness existed and changing everything it encountered. Wu Jin stood in what had once been the throne room of the Keth Overlord on the capital world of Vex Prime, but the crystalline chamber had been transformed into something that defied easy description. The walls pulsed with living light that responded to the thoughts and emotions of everyone present, while the floor had become a map of the galaxy that showed not just the positions of stars and planets, but the flow of consciousness itself as it moved between worlds and dimensions. The transformation had not been a war in any conventional sense. How could there be war when the fundamental nature of reality itself was changing? The Keth weapons had become useless, not because they were destroyed, but because the awakened consciousness of countless beings simply denied them permission to function. Their ships still flew, but now they flew in partnership with human crews, who understood how to manipulate space-time through focused intention, rather than mechanical force. The resistance has ended on the outer worlds, reported Taeho, his consciousness interfacing directly with the galactic awareness network that had grown up around the awakening. He no longer needed to be physically present to communicate. His thoughts could reach across light years instantly, by traveling through dimensions that existed beyond the normal flow of time. The last holdout colonies have requested teachers to help them understand the new reality. Some Keth had fled to distant galaxies, unable to accept a universe where their technological superiority meant nothing. But most had remained, and many of them were now working alongside humans to explore the implications of what consciousness could achieve when freed from the limitations of purely physical existence. Overlord Vex 9 was one of those who had chosen to stay and learn. His skin now bore markings similar to those of the awakened humans, though they pulsed with different colors and patterns that reflected his alien neural structure. When he spoke, his words carried the same multidimensional harmonics that indicated a mind that had learned to perceive reality across multiple levels of existence. "I have received reports from the exploration fleets," he said, his voice carrying wonder and humility that would have been impossible for a Keth overlord just months before. "The awakening is spreading beyond our galaxy. Other species are beginning to remember their own potential. The universe itself seems to be evolving." Captain Dong Su nodded thoughtfully. He had continued to change as the awakening progressed, his consciousness expanding to encompass understandings that pushed the boundaries of what it meant to be human. Yet he remained recognizably himself, the explorer who had chosen to bring knowledge back to his people, rather than transcending beyond their ability to follow. "That was always the plan," he said. "The beings we encountered told us that consciousness evolution follows predictable patterns. Once it begins in one species, it creates resonances that awaken the potential in others. We're witnessing the emergence of a new phase of galactic civilization." The evidence was everywhere, on worlds that had been stripped bare by industrial exploitation. Forests were growing back overnight as awakened minds learned to accelerate natural processes through conscious partnership with living systems. Oceans that had been polluted beyond hope of recovery were becoming pristine again as humans and other species worked together to transform toxins into harmless compounds through quantum-level manipulation. Earth itself had become almost unrecognizable. The strip mines had been filled in and transformed into gardens that produced more food per square meter than the most advanced agricultural technology had ever achieved. The orbital factories still operated, but now they created things that had never existed before. Devices that operated across multiple dimensions, art forms that existed as pure crystallized emotion, and tools that enhanced consciousness rather than replacing it. "I still don't fully understand how this is possible," admitted Science Officer Yex-2, who had requested assignment to the joint research teams that were exploring the theoretical foundations of consciousness-matter interaction. "The mathematics suggest that what we're observing should be impossible, yet the evidence is undeniable." So Young smiled at him with the patience of a teacher who had grown accustomed to explaining concepts that existed beyond conventional scientific frameworks. "The mathematics you're using assume that consciousness and matter are separate phenomena that can only interact through mechanical intermediaries. Once you accept that they're different aspects of the same underlying reality, the apparent impossibilities become simple expressions of natural law." She gestured toward the living map on the floor, and it responded by showing the flow of awakened consciousness across the galaxy in real time. Streams of light connected world to world, species to species, creating a network of awareness that spanned thousands of light years. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time, a visual representation of intelligence evolving beyond anything that had existed before. "But what about individual identity?" asked Wu Jin, voicing a concern that many humans had expressed as the awakening progressed. "If consciousness becomes collective, do we lose what makes us uniquely ourselves?" "Look at us," Yejin replied, her voice carrying the warm tones of someone who had found peace with profound change. "We're all connected to the Galactic Awareness Network. We can share thoughts and experiences across vast distances. We can manipulate matter through collective intention. But we're still individuals. We still have our own personalities, our own goals, our own ways of understanding the universe." She was right, Wu Jin realized. The awakening hadn't made humans into a hive mind or erased their individual differences. Instead, it had enhanced them, allowing each person to become more fully themselves while simultaneously participating in something larger than any single consciousness could achieve alone. The same was true for other species. The Keth who had chosen to join the awakening hadn't lost their alien nature. They had become more completely Keth while gaining access to capabilities they had never imagined possible. The few other intelligent species in the galaxy were undergoing similar transformations, each according to their own nature and potential. "What about those who choose not to participate?" Vex 9 asked. "There are still beings who prefer the old ways, who find comfort in purely physical existence. Will they be forced to change?" "No," Dongsu replied firmly. "Consciousness evolution cannot be imposed from outside. It must arise from within, from a genuine desire to understand more about the nature of reality and one's place in it. Those who are not ready will continue to live as they choose, and their children or their children's children may choose differently when they're ready. But the universe has changed around them," Tejo pointed out. "The old rules of conquest and domination no longer work. Technology based purely on mechanical principles seems primitive compared to what awakened consciousness can achieve. How will unawakened beings cope with that reality? The same way our ancestors coped when they first learned to use tools," So Young answered. "Slowly, carefully, learning through observation and experimentation. Some will choose to remain as they are, and that's their right. Others will gradually develop curiosity about what's possible and begin their own journey toward awakening." The conversation was interrupted by an alert from the Galactic Awareness Network. Something was happening at the edge of known space, something that required immediate attention. The main display shifted to show long-range sensor readings from the exploration vessels that had been mapping the galaxy's outer reaches. "Another dimensional rift," Yex-2 reported, his excitement evident in both his voice and the rapid color changes of his skin. "But this one is different from the anomaly that took the persistence. The energy signatures suggest it leads to a completely different realm of existence." "The beings who taught us spoke of others," Dongsu said thoughtfully. "Consciousnesses that evolved along different paths, exploring aspects of existence that we haven't even begun to understand. Perhaps we're about to meet them. Through the Galactic Awareness Network, every awakened consciousness in the galaxy could perceive the rift as if they were standing directly in front of it. It was vast beyond comprehension, a tear in reality that showed glimpses of realms where the laws of physics were poetry and mathematics were music. Things moved on the other side that existed as pure pattern and meaning. Intelligences so advanced that their simplest thoughts created new forms of beauty. Should we attempt contact? Wu Jin asked. We should be ready to learn, Dong Su replied. The universe is vast and consciousness takes countless forms. Each one we encounter teaches us something new about what's possible. Standing in the transformed chamber on Vex Prime, surrounded by beings who had once been conquerors and conquered but were now partners in exploration, Wu Jin felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun with a single lost ship had led to the awakening of consciousness across the galaxy.